Hello, and welcome to episode 431 of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth Parrott, historian and deputy director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum. And with me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, retired Navy Captain Bill Tody, former skipper of the fast attack submarine USS Indianapolis, Commodore of Submarine Squadron 3 in Pearl Harbor, and many others. How are you this 5 days before Christmas, Bill?
Doing well, Seth. Just about ready for that.
Indeed, indeed. And if you're watching, you can clearly tell that the third member of our crew is with us. Fantastic historian and good buddy, Jon Parshall. Jon, how are you these 5 days before Christmas?
I am well, yes, and hopefully we'll make it to Christmas, and there might even be something under the tree. Who knows? I mean,
there you go. Yeah. That's what we can all hope for anyway.
Uh-huh.
And the fourth member of our crew is with us today as well, and I'm going to reintroduce him for the last time because I'm getting tired of saying the same thing over and over again. He's with us for our Q&A sessions, and he'll be with us for CBI. My good buddy, Shawn Bergstrom. Shawn is a retired United States Army major, where in his military career, he served as a cavalry officer with over a decade of service with stops in the 1st Cav, 7th Cav Squadron, U.S. Armor School, a deployment in the Sandbox with the 153rd Cav Squadron before finishing his career as a military science instructor at FSU. How are you, my brother?
Ready to rock. I'm excited. This is we're doing a marathon today. I'm pretty pumped up and ready to rock.
Pretty ready to rock and roll. So cheers, gentlemen.
Cheers.
We should before we get in, we should divulge the recipe, right? For the fabulous
absolutely.
Sink packs. So several of us are doing Sink packs, which was Chester Nimitz's signature cocktail that he made during the war. And if anybody wants to do this at home, basically what you do is you take a sugar cube in the bottom of your glass, put a couple of, shots of bitters in there, and then you muddle all that up so that you have a sugary mixture at the bottom, 2 ounces of bourbon on the bottom, a bunch of ice in there, and then an ounce of dark rum. And today I'm using my favorite Woodford Reserve and my wife's favorite dark rum, El Dorado 12-year. This is good stuff. And the recipe doesn't call for a lemon peel, but I think most discerning drinkers, would put a lemon peel as a garnish in there. So that's
sophisticated.
Yeah, sophisticated. Although this is not a sophisticated drink.
It is not.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something. Yeah. Let me tell you something. As we stated before we started recording, I am a drinker, and I took a pull of this, and it made my eyelids flap like a window shade. I mean, it is stout. It is stout.
Yeah,
but it's good. It's tasty.
It is. It's good. I said just before I got on here, I got to go make my Sink pack, and my wife's comment was, "Oh God." So we're underway.
And folks, I am the designated driver today with my Sprite. So
Bill has a very legitimate
making sure
excuse,
that
though.
you all don't get in trouble.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, Bill may be the only one talking at the end of this.
Yes, also true. It's a marathon.
Well, that would be a change.
Oh, goodness gracious. All right, let's get it on. Shawn, take it to us.
All right. Commodore, does the cavalry have the con?
The cavalry has the con, but not the deck.
Okay.
See if you guys know what the difference is. All right, go ahead.
Just a little bit, I always like to talk a little bit before we get started. As we've alluded to on more than one occasion, we got over about 500 questions. And just to kind of peek behind the curtain of what happens is, if you could imagine, I go through 500 emails. So if I see an email and there's all these words, I copy, paste, and put it in the not going to be on this questionnaire. So then I take the small
questions are good
questions. Yeah. And then I take the smaller ones, and of course I drop them in there, and then I review all of the questions. So in the future, as always, and the last questionnaire we had, I would go through them, and guys, there's a way to make a paragraph 1 sentence, or a sheet 2 sentences. So highly encourage you, just rewrite it. Think of how to minimize the questions next time. So please please, for my sanity, I know we're going to do this again. I'm sure we will. I have no doubt. But just if you don't get your question in, please, again, don't blame them. Don't give them a bad review. Still go get John's book. Just
it's Sean's fault though.
It's my fault, right?
Yeah.
So that's just...
Sean, I got to interrupt. I'm sorry. Why does Seth looking at his glasses if there's a hole in it? Seth, that's not why the level's going down.
No, I was looking at the bottom of it because everything started to filter to the bottom like a muddy bucket of water, and I just kind of
it
surprised
that's what's
me.
happening. I got it. Yeah, sure.
Dr. Michael J.M. wants to know, good evening. I just finished watching to episode 423. Once again, you all present yourselves in sartorial splendor in, quote, those wonderful shirts. Isn't it high time you shared where to purchase, quote, those wonderful shirts with the UHPWP faithful? I have Googled multicolor Mandelbrot Paisley Hawaiian shirts more than once, all for naught. Please share the link or just with me. My dad landed at Normandy with the 3rd Armored, would love the program, and he would definitely love your shirts.
Okay, all right. First of all, I don't remember what episode 423 was. I have no freaking clue which one that one was.
Yeah,
I'm thinking
we should have a link for the shirt, and we should be able to make that happen.
We did. All right, that was the Tenichigo. That was Yamato. If you go on the YouTube channel,
that's right,
to that episode, and you go click on the description of the video, the link to where you buy these shirts is there. So I'm
pretty sure the manufacturer's name is Adaychic, which is ADAYCHIC. I'm pretty sure that's the vendor who sells this thing.
Yeah,
so.
The link, the hot link that John sent to Bill when we did all this initially is in the show notes of that particular episode. If you go back, or at least it should be. Regardless, I'll put it on the bottom of the screen right here so you can go find that. And oh, by the way, speaking of which, I got an email from a gentleman like a week ago, and forgive me, I don't remember his name, but he sent me a picture of him and his best friend wearing these two very same shirts.
Oh man,
that they went out and purchased. I was like, wow,
that's frightening.
That's awesome. Anyway, all right, rock and roll.
We ought to get a cut on these. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, we ought to.
All right.
All right.
So, Bill wants to know. I'm sorry, Jim Johnson wants to know, Seth and Bill, how do you meet and decide on the podcast? Never miss an episode. So he just wants to know, hey, what's the genesis of this best podcast on the planet?
Okay.
Seth,
Bill, you want to take it?
Seth gives a recommendation, and I say, okay.
No.
That's pretty much it.
So back in 2022, February 2022, Bill and I were each flown to, in Portland, Maine.
We're in Portland, Maine. Yep.
Yeah, to do studio interviews and studio shots for Lost Ships of World War II.
Right.
It was produced by Lone Wolf Productions. John, you were a part of that too, but you
were in it too.
Yeah, but I wasn't out there with you guys. That would have been a hoot. But anyway.
That was a hoot because we were there for a week. Bill and I and Rob Kraft and Paul Mayer, we were all there for a week.
Yep.
And there were a few other guys who popped in and popped out.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to know each other pretty well after hanging around with each other for a week, every day, all day long.
In that cold-ass house that we were filming in, too.
We filmed in a warehouse. We filmed in a warehouse.
I filmed in like this old house. I had like jackets on my feet. I mean, it was colder than frick. Anyway, go on.
Well, we were sitting.
Yeah. I've never heard this story, so.
Yeah, we were sitting around.
No, but the question was, why Maine in February?
Yeah, really. Agreed. 100% agree.
I live in Florida.
100% agree.
Okay, go ahead, Seth.
But we had a lot of time on our hands after the shows would be done shooting for the day, and inevitably we go back to the hotel. Everybody go to their room and do whatever they had to do, and there would be a text between the four of us who were staying there. Hey, meet in the bar, and we go down in the bar and we would sit there and slam drinks all night. Well, not all night long, but for a good bit of the night and shoot the breeze. Mainly beer, but regardless of this, Bill and I had a conversation, and actually it was you, Bill, that said, hey, you know what? It'd be kind of cool to do a podcast. I was like, yeah, it would be kind of cool. We ought to try that. And then the idea kind of died on the vine. That was in February. And it was, I think, in June of that year, I shot you a message and I was like, hey, if we're going to do this, probably ought to do this. and we recorded our first episode on my daughter's birthday, August 30th, 2022.
Yeah, and we said, yeah, I think the precise way we said it was, we owe it to the guys, the World War II
True. That's
dudes,
very true.
to give this a shot. We'll give it a few months. Nobody will watch. And then we'll say, well, at least we tried. That was the plan.
Yep.
It didn't quite work out that way.
It did not. It did
That's
not.
cool.
Yeah,
It's
I'm very
still-
glad too, because it's been a lot of fun. You know, I mean, obviously World War II has been, you know, an enormous part of my life, as it has for all of us. And being able to do what you love and do it on something that you enjoy with your friends makes it even that much more enjoyable.
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot of dark things that we talk about, a lot of nightmare starting material. Nightmare fuel, I guess, is a better word for it. But as Bill said, it's to people say this all the time, and most of them are full of crap. But I'm being dead serious. It's to honor the guys that I knew, that Bill knew, that John knew. You know, everybody that we've met over our lifetime that served in this war and this theater and other theaters too. But yeah, so that's it.
Good answer.
Seth and I,
Great
yeah,
question.
Seth and I've been in the same place at the same time, Maine, Benicia for the Indianapolis thing, right?
Yep.
The World War II last year, not this year.
Mm-hmm. That's
Is
it.
that it?
Annapolis.
Oh, Annapolis. Yeah, that's right.
Annapolis, 4 times. We've been in the
Yep.
same room at the same time.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And we're going to be in San Diego too.
Yeah. And we
Seth, I
should
hardly
actually,
know ye.
we
We're gonna be in
should,
San
we should
Diego.
plug that
Yeah.
too, that, yeah, the three of us
Yeah.
will be at the Western Naval History Association's conference on February 1st and 2nd in San Diego aboard the USS Midway Museum. I'm really looking forward to doing that. And that is courtesy of the U.S. Naval Academy's Alumni Association that is sponsoring that event and paying some of our expenses to get us out there. Really appreciate them backing us up and making that possible. Thank you.
Cool.
Yes.
Great explanation, guys. Here we go. Ugaki in his diary says that the Central Force was told after the Battle of Sibuyan
Civilian.
Cebuana.
Sea and the loss of the Musashi that, quote, the fleet at Leyte had gone out, leaving few ships in the bay, end quote. Given that intelligence, what was the point of continuing with the Central and Southern Forces' approach to Leyte Gulf? Does this make the decision of Central Force to withdraw after the Battle of Samar more sensible than viewed as a failure to carry out the task assigned? Regards, Martin.
Great question. I mean, and Mark Stilley has talked about this too in the talk that he just gave at the museum, that the whole operation is kind of nonsensical just because of those timing aspects that you just brought out, that the majority of the initial landing echelon is going to be gone by the time that Kurita can even get there. There are still ships in the bay. I mean, there's sort of the second wave of logistics is going in, but yeah, Mark would say that he thinks that Kurita made the correct decision, that it was not worth throwing away the lives of those guys to go all the way in. I'm sort of on the fence on that, in that you've come this far. All those guys are going to die at some point in time anyway. I mean, all the dudes on Yamato who are, you know, right here, right now, they all end up dying, right? At another even more ignominious point in the war. I go back and forth on this myself.
We say that now, but in October 44, you know, when we did our Leyte Gulf stuff, we talked about this. We talked about Kurita and his decision, and we said that, you know, he was a guy that was a little bit ahead of his time, and that he cared more about his men than a lot of Japanese flag officers. And I think, exactly to your point, he was like, why am I going to sacrifice these people needlessly? This is stupid. Yeah. And, you know, there's the whole thing about sighting masts on the horizon, which is, you know, probably fabricated. Mark Stilley says it's probably fabricated, and it was, because there was no American ships anywhere near him. And that was his excuse to beat feet and get out of there. Yeah. But I think, you know, Kurita was following his orders, and he was looking for any freaking excuse known to man after Sibuyan Sea, after they just take that, you know, getting attacked by a swarm of bees. He's looking for any excuse he can to get the hell out.
Yeah.
And when he starts chasing those carriers at Samar, and, you know, he's getting berated by American aircraft, as we've said, you know, that's what turned the tide of that battle, was aircraft, not the destroyers. God bless them. I think that was the excuse Kurita needed. He's like, I'm out. Goodbye. Like,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's my opinion anyway.
Cool. All right. This is rapid fire for Bill, the Commodore. Get ready, Commodore. I got 3 quick ones for you.
Okay.
Yes, no, and yes.
What do you mean when you say black shoes versus brown shoes?
Yeah, so brown shoe Navy is the aviators, black shoe is generally the SWOs. We submariners would wear whatever we wanted. Go.
Wasn't there something about the brown because of the airfield or something? Am I pulling that out?
No,
And the cow
there's all
patties.
kinds of silly stories, but go ahead. So,
Okay,
yeah, John?
sorry. What is the difference between flag rank opposed to rank?
Flag rank means admiral or general. Marine Corps generals are also called flag officers. Basically, it means you're flying a flag representing your position. I have a flag behind me. You can't see it. My Commodore flag, but it's not, I wasn't flag rank. Go ahead.
And finally, what is a fleet carrier versus just the old carrier?
Well, fleet carriers is intended mostly for offensive combat operations. So they needed to be bigger because you need the defensive combat air patrol, the defensive airplanes, and the attack airplanes. Frankly, the other differences are just silly in that they were the biggest carriers we could build. So we relegated them to smaller, less capable missions or single missions at a time kind of thing. John, you can weigh in on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, people don't call them that anymore. And of course, there were light fleet carriers too. That was the
Exactly.
Princeton and her 6 sisters. So, yeah, these are carriers that I think you would say were fit to do frontline duty sorts of missions, as opposed to jeep carriers, escort carriers, like the Taffies, who just should not be in any way exposed to direct danger if we can possibly arrange it.
Yeah, fleet carriers are
Right.
your big girls. Those are the Essex, those are the Saratoga, those are the Enterprise, Yorktown class, that kind of stuff. And that's all that consisted of. So your CVLs, like John was saying, Princeton and Independence and San Jacinto and those are light carriers. And then of course the Taffies were escort CVEs. So technically we had 4 classes because there were the training carriers off of Lake
CVT.
Michigan, which are, huh?
Yeah, CVT.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
We had
yeah.
ASW carriers too, at some one point. So
Right.
all kinds of different, but all those distinctions are gone today.
Cool.
There's CVN, nuclear powered.
That was from Brad M. He said, "Thank you, muchachos, for that one." Okay, so this one I'm going to have a few questions this episode that's tilting our hand to maybe for later episodes. So this was a great question. Basically was asked, how did the loss of the ING aircraft during the Indian Ocean raids and the Easter Sunday raid in particular contribute to Akagi's absence at the Battle of Coral Sea and thus contribute to Zukaku and Shukaku's absence at Midway? Great question. And I know we're in the future, we're going to do the Kitu Butai in the Indian Ocean, which nobody knows about except for Jon Parshall.
And Tony Tully even more. I don't think it was Yamamoto's intention ever to have sent Akagi down to Coral Sea. I mean, basically what ends up happening is Admiral Inoue, who is the commander of 4th Area Fleet down there, is begging for some support for this upcoming Operation MO that he's putting together. And when he goes back to Combined Fleet and says, I need, some air support here, initially they're just like, oh, we'll send Kaga, on down to help you out. You don't need much. And then in the event, there's that carrier raid that the Americans put in on March 10th, which flies over the Owen Stanley Mountains during the landings around Lae on the northern coast of New Guinea, and just savages those landings. That's a real eye-opener for the Japanese. And so at that point, Inoue goes back to Combined Fleet and says, dudes, one carrier is not going to get it done. I need more than that. I need at least a carrier division. And so grudgingly then Combined Fleet ends up peeling off Carriers Division 5, Shokaku and Zuikaku, to go down for that operation. But I don't think it was Yamamoto's intention ever to send Car Div 1 down there. let alone the entire mobile force. And this is one of the things that I talk about in Shattered Sword, is that nobody in the Japanese Navy really seems to have understood that there were precisely two kinds of operations in this war. You know, there's operations that are worth supporting with all your carriers, or there's operations that are worth supporting with none. Because if you send your carriers out in penny packets, just given the mobility of that weapon system, the enemy can be ambushing you anywhere in the damn Pacific, right? And potentially bringing superior numbers to the point of the spear. You look at the Battle of Coral Sea that developed, Nimitz wanted to go down there with all 4 of his carriers and fight that battle, and he would have done so had it not been for the Doolittle raid. So yeah, bottom line is Yamamoto, completely botches this section of the war in that he sort of puts Operation MO in the front of the queue, and in essence then mortgages the success of the Midway operation depending on the outcome of the Coral Sea operation, and that turns out to be disastrous.
Cool. All right. Good morning. This is Patrick from New York. Thank you so much for producing this outstanding podcast. I know you only have 2 hours per show, but my question is just how divided the Japanese Navy
Yeah, right.
and
Only 2 hours.
Only 2 hours.
Yeah.
Japanese Navy and Army High Command. It seems they're pretty much at odds at everything. Now, guys, I had received a few questions on this rivalry.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let you guys do some smooth jazz here back and forth on the components, elements, but also the birth of this. Where do you think this stems from, and how it plays in an overall sense in the war?
Oh man, there's
Yeah,
a lot to unpack there.
That's a lot. That's a long talk.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, its roots go all the way back to the formation of the modern Japanese state, the beginning of the Meiji era. That it was
1800s.
Yeah, it goes back to the 1800s. But the more proximate cause is that in the immediate pre-war years, if you look at the relative budgets of these two services, the Navy it's all about money, and the Navy's getting the majority of it because, lo and behold, building ships is extremely expensive. And so the Army is pissed off about that. And the result is that when you actually get into the war, there is no real civilian oversight of these two militaries. They are, in effect, running the government because both of them have the ability to collapse any civilian government at any point in time simply by there's a law at that time that says that you can't have a cabinet without an Army minister and a Navy minister in that cabinet. And it is the Army and the Navy, respectively, who have to nominate those two ministers. And if they simply decline to name a person to serve in that cabinet, you can't form a government. So that gives both of the militaries veto power over the formation of a civilian government. And as a result, the civilians can't, keep them in line, and the emperor can't either. So there's just any number of situations during the war where these two services basically just, we're at loggerheads and we don't have to agree, and nobody can knock our heads together and make us agree. And so there would be, these liaison meetings between the two services where the decision or the agreement that comes out is, we will agree to disagree. I'm going to do what I want to do. They're going to do what they're going to do. This is no way to run a war. So.
And much to their detriment.
Go
ahead, Bill. No, go ahead, Bill. Go ahead.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I was going to add the strategic level on that. So the Army rightly understood that wars are won on the ground. So there's no doubt about that, right? So you take possession of land, and that's how you win a war. So the Army looks at it, and that's the correct concept, by the way. This is why air forces, for example, they can cause nations to capitulate, but you can't defeat them in the air. You have to take the ground or get them to surrender. And I'm saying that not for you, Sean, because it's true. But the Japanese Navy, and Japan being an island nation, saw themselves not as they had no intention to replicate the United States Navy. They linked themselves to Great Britain, another island nation, and the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy in Great Britain is the senior service. They call themselves, the nation calls them. It's the Royal Navy. It's not the Royal Army.
Yes.
It's the British Army, right?
Yes.
And the Royal Navy. So the Navy sees themselves trying to replicate Great Britain, the other island nation, not the United States. So they both had, I guess, virtuous reasons for believing they were, first among, uber alles kind of thing.
Yeah.
But they were both too, thick-headed to put the nation's priorities above their own. Go ahead, Seth.
And it's much, that was brilliant, by the way, but it's much to their detriment too, because all you got to do is look at Guadalcanal.
Oh, yeah.
And what happens there. The Army is dependent on the Navy to not only put their people ashore, but to keep them in supply. And the Navy, admittedly, they do try, but they fail miserably over and over and over again. So that relationship that was already bad to begin with just gets worse.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the Guadalcanal campaign, the IJA says, hey, jackass, you let us starve.
Yeah.
We put all these, or we tried to put all these people on here. And when we got them there, you let us hanging out to dry, man. Yeah. And in a sense,
not wrong.
Yeah, they're not wrong. Yeah. And that relationship got worse throughout the war. Only in 45, when they're starting to conduct the kamikaze raids, we talked about this. Yeah. Do they actually have a come to Jesus meeting where they sit at the table and say, okay, guys, look, this situation is really bad. So we need to work this out, and we need to work it out like this. You guys do this, we'll do it together, and we're going to, kiss and make friends, and everybody's going to be fine. And that's what they do. Obviously it doesn't work out that way, but that's what they do at the end of the war. So, I mean, it's too little too late, but it happens over and over and over again. The Philippines is one example. Guadalcanal is another example. I could go on and on and on.
On and on. Yeah.
Great answer.
It's a mess.
Yeah. Just to circle back, and I just add something where John and Bill started. If anybody's seen The Last Samurai, you see the basically Meiji Restoration unfold. And that's when the Japanese made the decision, we're going to send people across the globe, and we're going to figure out how to modernize our military. And to Bill's point, they said, who's the best Navy? Well, let's send people to England. Who's the best army? They sent people to France until the Franco-Prussian War. They said maybe we should send people to Prussia.
Germany.
So there's
exactly right.
There is a huge mess, but it has its roots in the Meiji Restoration. Bob asks from New York, the U.S. class of heavy cruiser CA had one of the highest loss rates of any naval warship. Was there a design issue with that class of ship? I read somewhere the U.S. heavy cruisers had inadequate ventilation throughout the ship, which required the watertight doors to be left open, even during general quarters. I'll look forward to your thoughts.
I'll let Bill answer the ventilation thing.
Certainly true with the Portland class in Annapolis, right? There's like 4.5, and their design deficiencies all date from the Washington Naval Treaty and trying to keep the ship under 10,000 tons. So there was certainly a bunch of design deficiencies with that class. Go ahead, Seth.
No, I was going to say that the whole we lose a ton of heavy cruisers in the beginning of the war for multiple reasons, not the least of which we talked about the design flaws with the the glass jaw and all that other kind of thing.
Wow.
But if you look at what we build after that, we recognize the fact that this is a problem. We as a country recognize that these heavy cruisers kind of suck, because the only ones that survive.
I don't know that they suck. They actually were comporting to the treaty limits. I mean, that's the issue. Right. You look at Japanese heavy cruisers, and they're well over the treaty, and they had their problems too, which we can talk about. But go on, Seth.
Right. No, but I was saying that the United States realizes that these things are a problem. We don't really spend time in rearming these things like the San Francisco, the New Orleans, Minneapolis, and cruisers like that. But if you notice, when we start building ships, we're not building any other heavy cruisers except for the Baltimore and that class, and that's it.
Which rocks.
Other than that, though, everything is a light cruiser, and because we start taking on this new design, this new ship class, and we start pouring money. 52 Cleveland class cruisers. Obviously, we don't build all 52, but I mean that's a lot of freaking cruisers, man. And it's one class, one class.
Yeah.
Well, machine gun cruisers. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say that if you
one.
look at Japanese heavy cruisers, they got their problems too. They are big, fast, very heavily armed, but they're over displacement. They were cheating on the treaty, and but even within that context, they often came in over what the designers intended, which had the tendency then to put their armored belt lower in the water than was actually beneficial in some cases. And they didn't have enough displacement left over to put adequate anti-aircraft weapons on them as well. So, there's always give and take. The other thing I would point to is the Germans, the Admiral Hipper class, 10,000-ton cruiser that comes in at 17,000 tons. It's the biggest heavy cruiser of the war. So
a pocket battleship, you mean, right?
It's a big, but the interesting thing about that, though, is but yet on that 17,000 tons, they are still only mounting 8-inch guns, right? So it doesn't have that much more. It's got less gun power than either the U.S. cruisers or the Japanese, which in many cases are rocking 10 8-inch guns. So, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Those German admirals did tend to put on weight. So, hey, the armor belt thing that John referred to, go back to episode, I have no idea what episode it was, where I talk about metacentric height, and you understand why that was necessary.
That was the Typhoon episode that we were talking about. Metacentric.
That's right, the Typhoon episode. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyway.
Great job, guys. All right. Hi, Bill and Seth. My name's Alex from Montreal, Canada. Here's my question. What do you guys view as the most underappreciated contributions of the Army Air Force in the Pacific Theater, particularly regarding missions beyond the famous carrier battles? Also, if possible, do you have any books to suggest on flying off aircraft carriers from World War II? That's from, again, Alex, Montreal, Canada.
Underappreciated Army Air Forces operations. I'd say just about anything by Kenny in the New Guinea area.
Fair.
That's not a widely covered topic. We've covered it to some degree, but it's not a widely covered topic. I mean, these guys are flying out of Australia, and then out of New Guinea for years.
Yeah.
And they're the ones honestly putting the pressure on Rabaul more than the Navy is, except for the two carrier raids, and those are two one-offs. Yeah. But I mean, it's Kenny's people. It's General Kenny's people that are putting all that pressure on Rabaul in the South Pacific in 1940, late 42 and through 43. It really puts the thumb down on Rabaul. It doesn't, it eventually crushes it, but it's, we did an episode on that too, but it's not all, but it's mostly Army Air Forces. And then the Army Air Force operations out of the Philippines. There's a ton of aerial combat that goes on down there. If you listen to our episodes, if you read John Bruning's book about Race of Aces, the Ace Race,
right.
The Ace Race is, the first part of that book is fighting over New Guinea. I'd say maybe the first 60% is fighting over New Guinea. And then they kill everything over New Guinea. And the air war kind of has a lull for the Army Air Forces. And then they go to the Philippines and it's just like kicking a hornet's nest. So there's a ton of aerial combat over those two areas of the Pacific that is relatively uncovered. And that's where Dick Bong and Tommy McGuire and Gerald Johnson and people like that are just slaying Japanese aircraft. And it's a huge part of the war that's relatively uncovered.
Yeah. And a really innovative Air Force too.
Very much so.
They're the guys that come up with the B-25 Strafer. Kenny walks in the door with this idea for a bomb called a parafrag, which ends up getting, I can dump this thing out of the bomb bay over an airfield and it kind of flutters
low
down.
altitude. Yep.
Yeah, right. And so, you combine that with the B-25 Strafer, and it's just this enormously powerful weapon that just you can chew up airfields, it can chew up barges. It's, as a whole, I would say that Kenny is doing, so much more with so much less. He's getting all the cast-offs, all the airframes that
100%
aren't going to Europe. Right. He's got to make do with the leavings, and he does a great job with it.
He takes the 38. He gets I had somebody say there weren't P-38s in Europe. Yeah, dude, there were. There were a lot of them, but he gets the majority of them, and he not he, but his pilots turned this thing into an absolute zero killer.
Yep.
And then he takes, and then he takes the B-25, which is, in my opinion, probably one of the most underappreciated aircraft of the entire war, is the B-25 Mitchell. And, everybody thinks B-25, they think of the Doolittle rig for obvious reasons, but that was the medium bomber that they were flying in the Kinney's Air Force. That's pretty much what they were flying. And to your point, they turned that thing into a jack of all trades and let it do all these different things: strafing, medium bombing, low altitude, medium altitude, anti-shipping, barge hunting. I mean, it was an incredible aircraft, and that's an underappreciated bird, I think, is the Mitchell, because that's a cool little bird too, man.
Yeah. It'll leave you deaf at the end of your your tour with it, because it's just the loudest freaking airplane on the planet. But yeah, anyway, next to the Tupolev 95. Anyway, pray continue.
Do you have a book, a first-hand account of a carrier pilot?
Oh God, there's tons of them.
Top of your head?
Off the top of my head.
Obviously not Army Air Force accounts of flying off of carriers.
If you want
30 seconds over Tokyo, 30 seconds over Tokyo.
If you want a good account of Army Air Force operations in the South Pacific, Eric Bergerud's
Fire in the Sky.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Great
book. That's an awesome book.
Yeah, great book.
It's about yay thick.
I would say too that Bruce Gamble's series on the reduction of Rabaul, he does a lot of good work on that. Air Force as well.
Bruce Gamble does a good work on everything.
He's a great guy.
He's awesome.
One of my favorite aspects of Shattered Sword is at the end of the back of the book regarding the potential Japanese amphibious invasion of Midway. Had the naval actions gone favorably, Jon paints a gruesome picture of what could have been very disastrous amphibious operation. Would love for Jon to expound. This is from James W. And I'm just going to, Seth and I talked a little bit about this. And last night I spent some time researching the Wake Island. And there's going to be a podcast on that. I think where the question comes from is people have a hard time wrapping their mind around, like, well, how can you go to seize Wake Island? How can you seize Guam? How can you seize the Philippines, but you can't seize Midway 6 months later? I think that's where people have a problem.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And I should preface this by saying that Alan Millett has a number of really good articles on Japanese amphibious capabilities in a way that I really didn't understand up until really a few years ago. So, i.e., after I wrote Shattered Sword, but I still stand by what we wrote then. If you look at Japanese amphibious doctrine, mostly what they're trying to do is land on unopposed beaches at night. That's the whole game plan. Because they do have some doctrine around providing destroyer gunfire support and that sort of thing, but really their whole thing is, let's just pick some place that isn't defended, get ashore. Once our infantry is ashore, we will do the standard Japanese infantry thing, which is, maneuver the enemy out of their positions and hit them with flank attacks and do all that happy crap. Anytime that the Japanese had to do an amphibious operation against a defended beach, it got ugly. So if you look at the casualties at Wake Island that they stacked up facing the very small Marine contingent that was on that island, it was bad. Same thing for the invasion of Corregidor, which happens in early May of 1942. They damn near failed when they came ashore that first time. The Marines, who were terribly outnumbered, but did have defensive positions on the few beaches that they were trying to land on the tail of Corregidor, they just shot the crap out of the Japanese landing forces, probably killed 50% of their landing teams there. Wow. Yeah, it's bad. So now let's look at Midway. Midway, you got two islands. It's surrounded by a coral reef. The Japanese do not have a landing craft that is going to be capable of bringing those troops over that reef. They don't have an Amtrak, like we're going to have an Amtrak. That means that they're going to have to deposit these dudes out on that reef. And then those dudes are going to have to walk through the lagoon to get to the beach with their rifles over their heads. In most cases, that lagoon is wadeable, but it's going to be chest high or higher. The Marines, I've never come up with a definitive number of Marines that were actually on the island itself, but it's north of 2,500. And these guys are just armed to the frickin' teeth. They've got a Marine Raider battalion there, I believe. Is it a whole battalion, Seth? Am I right?
It's not.
It's
It's
not.
not. It's two
company?
companies. It's two companies of
Thank you.
2nd Raider Battalion that are there.
Okay.
And yes, the Carlson's Raiders, the 2nd
Carlson.
Raider Battalion is
Right.
there.
So they've got very good dudes there. There's a number of 7-inch shore defense guns. There's automatic weapons out the yin yang. They have a platoon of light tanks on one of the islands as well. So this is not an undefended beach by any stretch of the imagination. There's barbed wire everywhere. There's thousands of IEDs that these Marine Raiders came up and placed all over the beaches. Good luck, dudes. And you're attacking at parity in numbers. That's not going to get it done. So I just cannot see, given the force correlation that the Japanese had at that operation and no really sophisticated gunfire support doctrine and no specialized equipment to get your troops over that reef and onto the beach in the way that we would be able to do, say, in 1944, you're not taking that island. You're going to have thousands of corpses floating in the lagoon by the end of that thing. I just cannot see it any other way.
Even with just throwing some what ifs here, John, just let's say we park some big battleships and just spend a couple of days and throw some aircraft. Even that's not going to get it done.
What percentage of the loadout of those battleships is HE?
Great question. Great point.
My thing is that my thing is this, exactly to what you were saying. When I knew the guys that were flying off of Midway Island, specifically guys in VMSB 241, there was a gentleman there named Sumner Witten. He flew the wind indicator. And he told me, he says, when he sat there like a week or so before the battle, and he watched Carlson's Raiders, 2 companies of them, come ashore. And he says, to your point exactly, John, these guys were on, he literally said, he says they were armed to the teeth. He said every single one of them had, crisscross machine gun belts of ammunition.
Bandoliers
They had,
and just
they had 30 cals, they had 50 cals. I mean, they were sent there to defend that island.
They're
or
pirates,
those islands.
man. These guys are.
They were.
They're
They were.
vamps.
And there was nothing on God's green earth that was going to allow the Japanese to take that island, because exactly to your point, they couldn't cross a reef. So at Wake Island, of course, it's the same type of thing, although the reef is a little bit closer to the beach than it is at Midway. So they would take their patrol craft and literally ram the reef and sacrifice the ships or the boats and their crews to get their troops ashore. When that happens at night, the Marines that are there watching all this unfold are pumping 3-inch and 5-inch rounds and just shredding these people, just absolutely annihilating these people. And it would happen tenfold at Midway because they were waiting for it. They were ready.
Yeah.
So it would have been a debacle.
With John Ford to film the whole thing.
Yes.
John would have. Yeah, absolutely.
John,
Seth, I noticed you're getting down. You're in your drink there a little bit.
I am.
Okay,
we get rolling.
John, do you know how many people the Japanese had earmarked for that invasion by any chance?
Oh God, there was just a recent article on that too. It's around 2,500 or 3,000. So again, they're going to be coming in at roughly 1-to-1 against the Marine defenders.
Mm-hmm.
Say goodnight. No way.
Yeah, not a chance.
Mm-hmm.
Great answer, guys. I'm going to try to combine 2 questions into one. So basically, we've got our boy Michael down in Australia. He says, "Hey guys, love the YouTube channel. Look forward to every episode." He lives in Fremantle, Western Australia, which I'm sure you know was the second biggest U.S. sub base of the Second World War. I'd love to know just how much planning the Navy did for its roles of submarines in their missions early in the war. Obviously, it's better in 44 and 45. And Bill kind of along the same lines from Manchester, New Hampshire says, hey, and this Guadalcanal campaign with all these Japanese ships around, where is the Commodore's sub force? Where are these guys in these tight windows? This is perfect for them. Like guys, where's the US sub? Where's Bill's beloved sub corps?
I'm going to let Seth answer that second question, but the first question was, we were not, first of all, remember the torpedo problems, right? That's point number one. We don't need to beat that dead horse. Point number two, Yeah, we were still going through the first cadre of COs who were learning how to fight and learning how to chase the enemy, and rather than, the pre-war trying not to get sunk. And so that was the second thing that was against us. We did not coordinate the submarine campaign very well with the larger naval effort. We basically sent the submarines out to attrit the enemy based on priorities that were definitely established by Nimitz. But the notion of an integrated undersea, surface, air campaign was just yet to be invented. And so the submarines were sent out pretty much on independent operations. Go patrol this area and kill anything you encounter in this area. There was by the way, water space management is the art of making sure submarines are distributed in a way where they won't interfere with each other.
What's that called?
Water space management.
Water space management. Ooh.
Yeah.
Can you get a degree in that, Bill?
Yeah, you can actually.
I like that. I've never heard that before. That's awesome.
Yeah. So if you're operating wolf packs, which we weren't doing yet, right, you can coordinate integrated multiple submarine operations in a way where they're not going to interfere with each other, shoot each other, and stuff like that. If you're not doing that, what you end up doing is carving out spots in the ocean and sending individual submarines to that spot in the ocean, patrol this area. You try to do that strategically, but you're not going to, for example, put a bunch of submarines in the slot with American ships, Japanese ships, trying to hope that the submarine CO is going to be able to correctly identify who's who based on masthead configuration when they're hauled down, which is they only see the top of their mast, things like that. So it's a very complicated problem. It was hard to coordinate integrated operations early in the war. We got better at it as time went on. But frankly, late in the war, the submarines were just getting so good at doing what they were doing, it almost became unnecessary. The one time we tried doing it was in Jon Parshall's Midway, and that didn't go so well, did it, John?
I was just going to comment about that, what you had there was a situation where there's this sort of fan-shaped series of little patrol boxes, about a dozen of them, and each one has got its own little fleet boat in it. But just because of the lack of water space management, you don't have the ability to actually concentrate those boats along a line of advance of Kido Butai. And so as a result, the only submarine that actually gets into contact there is the Nautilus, and she does her best. Yeah, she was a good boat, but she got crappy torpedoes, and that hurt her.
So as far as Guadalcanal is concerned, exactly, I'm not going to really expound on what Bill already said because he said it better than I could. But there were American submarines in the area, and there were times where American submarines did take shots at Japanese warships during the Guadalcanal campaign, including
connected. Kako was sunk by the S-38 at the tail end of the Battle of Savo Island. As they're retreating to Caviang with Cruiser Division 6, S-38 bags one of those heavy cruisers.
And they take a shot at they take a shot at one of the
slot, though, right?
Oh, yeah, it was further north than the slot. You're not going to be expecting American surface warships to be operating up in that neck of the woods.
And they also take a shot at one of the Japanese light carriers as well during Santa Cruz, and they miss.
Right.
Oh, that's
and I forget which one it is. I forget which submarine. Regardless of this, there are American submarines operating in that area. They are not operating in Iron Bottom Sound. Ain't going to happen. They're not going to operate in the slot for reasons that Bill just said. Not going to happen. They were there. They just weren't very successful, with the exception of 2 or 3 times, and that was really about it. But again, it also goes back to what Bill was saying and what we said the last episode on the Q&A. That wasn't necessarily American doctrine. We did it when we had to. We were out there trying to sink. We were commerce raiding.
Yeah,
for all intents and purposes. We weren't out there going to sink warships with our submarines. If we had the opportunity to do so, we did so, or at least we tried. And and that really doesn't change. That doctrine does not change until 1944, when we've got Darter and Dace that are out there waiting to intercept, hoping to intercept Kurita as he's coming through. And of course, they have,
Right.
a hell of a
Well,
time.
obviously at Phil C too, you have Kabbalah and
Right.
the other
And
boat that had
Shikaku and
yeah,
Taiho, yeah.
Taiho.
Mhm.
So anyway,
Great answer, guys. I know that was a little big one, but all right. So we got one from Scott. His dad served on the Henley destroyer. He asked, what advice do you have for someone who would like to research a relative's World War II Navy ship, Army unit, air squadron? Lots of us watch, listen to your podcast, have family members in the conflict, as you know, and many we serve didn't talk about it much. Please provide actual intelligence of how to start with maybe one or two sources. Thanks, guys, for all you do.
Okay, we get this question all the time. And Bill and
All
I had
the time.
actually, we kind of texted back and forth, but we meant to address it last week on last Q&A, but I think we just forgot. So here's the deal. And I'll make it short and sweet. You can, if you are a blood relative, you can access your relative's National Personnel Record Center, what they call a service jacket. If they were in the United States Navy or the United States Marine Corps during World War II, more than likely their records survived. And by that, I mean there was indeed a fire. People talked about a fire and people said, there wasn't a fire. They just don't want to do their work. No, there was actually a significant fire that destroyed like 90% of the United States Army records from World War II.
this happened
Sucks.
in 1973, and it destroyed between 16 and 18 million personnel files.
Yeah. I mean, it sucks, but it is what it is. You can write NPRC there in St. Louis. You can look up National Personnel Record Center and you can write and request your relatives' records.
You could do
It's
it,
a federal-
do it online too.
It's a, well,
You could do
that's
it
what I
online.
meant by right, but it's a federal institution. So that's all I'm going to say there. Their response time is significantly less than what you would expect and or like, but it is what it is. Whether
You
you
have
get
to
any,
demonstrate. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, whether you get anything out of it is, flip a friggin' coin. The Navy and Marine Corps records and some of the Army Air Force's records to a degree, but especially Navy and Marine Corps records are significantly more preserved, and you can get them if they're there. And when you get them, it's everything. I mean, it's their enlistment photograph, it's their friggin' thumbprint when they signed up, and it's their discharge papers and everything in between. So there's a lot of material there. I get requests all the time. Hey, can you help me with my dad's? No, I can't. I'm sorry. That takes an inordinate amount of time that I do not have. And museums, just so you know, if you think about writing the World War II museum saying, hey, how's my dad? They don't have any records. Museums do not store personnel records or records of any sort, by the way. So NPRC is going to be your best bet 99% of the time.
Yeah, and it's likely you're going to be disappointed when you receive it. I sent out for my uncles, who I talked about before, was in Guadalcanal in Philippines, Army, and luckily it wasn't one of those that destroyed. But what you get is he enlisted on this date, he was discharged on this date, he received these campaign medals or ribbons, he was promoted to these ranks on these dates. But it's not going to be a narrative of what he did. It's just not. So you want to know, was he in this particular battle? It's not in their personnel record. Sorry, folks.
Right. It's not.
The unit, if you get time to a particular unit and you go to the unit's history, which is a different question.
Different question.
Not in the National Archives so much as in the Army's records. You can go to unit histories. If you know he's assigned to a particular unit at a particular time and you go to and then you've got to research with the Army's unit records.
Exactly.
You may be able to kind of
Piece it
loosely
together.
time to a particular battle, but that's as good as it's going to get, folks.
Yeah.
Exactly. You can the best way the easiest thing to tie are aviators, specifically naval aviators, because they're on deck logs, they're on
Right.
muster rolls,
Flight logs.
they're on flight logs, so you can pretty much track where most of these cats went. He flew off of the Enterprise from this date to this date in this squadron, and then he transferred to this. You can do that, but that's a rare thing. That's a rare thing.
Yeah, that's like 0.0001% of the actual personnel in this war, obviously.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And if it's in, go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say there are also a lot of in the ground forces. There are a lot of unit survivor associations out there. I was in Germany. I was at a little castle that had taken some anti-tank rounds from apparently an American unit, and I was able to suss out, oh, it came from the 102nd Infantry Division, and lo and behold, out on the web, there's a Survivors Association for that division, and they had all of the regimental and battalion histories, digitized and in their little hoard, and sent them to me, and voila, mystery solved. So always use Google, to see if you know where your relative was posted in terms of their unit. There may be informal unit survivor associations out there that would have some of these histories that you can then glom onto.
Oh, last thing I'll say on this is, if they were in the Navy assigned to a ship or even a CB unit, there are these things called cruise books that were generated after each patrol, deployment, whatever. And again, if you know that your relative was on, it was in
USS.
My friend who was a CB on Peleliu, right? Cam Pelletier. I got his cruise book, and I was able to pin him down to a certain.
Where'd you find it?
Landing. He had it. So
I've seen it online.
He's still alive. I did his oral interview, right? So things he couldn't quite remember, I was able to glean out of the cruise book. But you might be able to find a ship cruise book online or eBay. So those are ways you can get them too.
Cool. Last thing I'll say is, if you're fortunate enough to know the Army unit, and you're fortunate enough that the Army unit's still active, you can contact the Army unit, because there's a historian there that'll tell you, here's where you go get all the files for that. So, great. Moving on. Thank you for putting this podcast. I look forward to it every new episode. I'm on Fireman in Cali and have found the discussions on damage control especially interesting. I look forward to Jon Parshall's next book, like all of us. And I'll submit my question. The Japanese went to great lengths to reconstitute some semblance of a carrier force mid-war that was wasted in seeking a decisive battle with a far superior American fleet, such as at Philippine Sea. Was there any option to use this fleet more profitably, such as a raiding areas on India, Australia, rather than seeking a direct battle with American carrier task force? Great question.
That is a great question. Yeah, because you just look at the outcome of Phil C and you're like, wasn't there anything we could have been doing that would have been better than that? The problem with going into, frankly, secondary areas like Indian Ocean is that you're not going to accomplish anything that's really strategically meaningful there. And this is one of the problems that the Japanese came sort of face to face with before Midway. They were doing a whole bunch of different war games around, what should our next game plan be? This is in the late February, early March timeframe, and they did war game out. We could move into the Indian Ocean, for instance, and I go back and forth on that one. The Brits were on the ropes. My God, it was a terrible time of the war for them, and India was far and away their most important colony. And if you can manage to take that away from the British, it could be really, really disastrous for them. Maybe it drives them from the war. It's possible. But from a war planning and logistical standpoint, I just don't think that Indian Ocean operations really are meaningful.
Not
also,
44.
Yeah, and certainly, more meaningful maybe in the middle of 42. You're not going to do anything at all in 44. That's exactly right.
But even in the middle of 42, the fight wasn't there. The fight's at Guadalcanal, So
yeah.
I mean, that's where they're throwing their meat,
Right. Well, I mean, but they did have an opportunity in March, April, May. They could have declined to go and fight in the Central Pacific. They could have actually aimed, their the full Monty, if you will, at the Brits and try to drive them out of the war. But if you look at what it was going to take to get Japanese divisions on, say, Ceylon, that is a completely undefended sea lane that goes all the way across the Indian Ocean. It's 1,500 miles of open water. They couldn't even keep a supply line open from the 600 miles from Rabaul down to Guadalcanal. How are they going to do that in the face of British air power that is firmly entrenched on Ceylon and also in southern India? I just don't think it makes any sense. And Ugaki's diary backs that up, that after they war gamed this out, they were like, Indian Ocean operations just don't seem to make sense. And that's when they end up turning back to the Central Pacific. And that's going to eventually take us to Midway. I can't think of anything in 1944 that they could have done pretty much other than what they did do. And understand too that having reconstituted this force and having built a number of new carriers, they've, beefed up the air groups. I mean, they bring a pretty damn big carrier fleet into that battle. It would have whipped any British carrier fleet that was out there. The problem for them is that they don't understand just how the American fleet has just metastasized into this completely outsized monster, that they have no comprehension of how good our fighters have become, how good our anti-aircraft is, how good our C-cubed I is at this point. We're just an entirely different Navy than we were in 1942.
This is the first, Phil C. This is Godzilla. This is when
Godzilla
pops up out of the ocean. This is when Godzilla says, "Hey, baby, come on.
Yo, bitches, now what?"
Yeah, here we come.
Yeah.
Because exactly to your point, this is a new Navy. If you look at what we got in 42 and 44, we've done this a million times. I'm not going to do it again. It's completely different.
Yeah.
And it's only getting bigger every freaking month. The United States Navy grows like a fungus. We call it the mighty fungus. It's like a fungus on a tree. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the Japanese had yet to see any sizable fleet action since October 26, 1942 at Santa Cruz.
That's right.
And that's not even close to what they're facing now. So when they see this, they're, oh my God.
Yeah. Whole different animal. Anyway.
Big time.
Good question, though. Great question.
Yeah, that was from Matt. The only thing I'm going to say about this is if in 44, Godzilla's coming.
But they don't.
This fleet is, but if hindsight, right? Let's have fun for a second. In 44, the Japanese are launching an offensive into India. It'd been nice to have some air assets to help support that offensive. Just kind of
but that's way north on the border, though. Carriers aren't going to be able to influence anything in infall.
And then too, on the flip side of that,
I was thinking Arkham offensives. Yeah,
fair.
They're going to stop the loss of the Marianas because they know at this point, if they lose the Marianas, that is ball game, Jackson. It is over. At least let me rephrase that. Those who actually have gray matter in their head know that when the Marianas fall, that's it. It's over with, bro. Yeah, really. It's over with at that point. And when they're going to throw everything they can to stop that invasion and to annihilate the American fleet at that stage, because that's what they have to do to theoretically keep those islands in their possession.
Sure. Just did the kamikaze episode. Just wondering, did any Japanese pilots return after the raids due to cowardice or failure to find the enemy? And if so, what happens to them? Great question, Johnny. Love the brevity of the question. So these guys come back, they land. Is it like
all the time? No, it happens all the time. Any number of times people would go out and they just can't find the enemy. You turn around, you go back home.
Or they had engine trouble.
And some of it was legitimate engine trouble. No, in the majority of those cases, they come back and they're like, okay, well, that's a bummer. There was one guy that I know of, though, that came back 7 times. And after the 7th time, they shot him. So, there was a limit to the patience that they had. But no, aborts happened all the time.
Hello, Seth and Bill. Thank you for all the amazing work producing such an informative and entertaining podcast. My question is for Bill. What are the most enduring lessons learned from the submarine operations in the Pacific Theater that continue to inform modern U.S. Navy submarine doctrine today, whether at the strategic, operational, or at the tactical level? This is from Chris.
Good. I love that question.
Love it.
So Admiral Rickover, the father of the nuclear Navy, was rightfully very concerned about reactor safety. You got to love the fact that we've been going now, how long has it been? Older than I've been alive. 2 years, it's been 70 years with nuclear reactors on submarines and have never had an accident, right? And so the caution that he built into our processes created a class of officers for whom caution was like the only thing they worried about, right? So, and I've worked with and for some of these people, and it was a lost lesson of World War II, where it was like the guys before World War II, we would sink submarines all the time, and the crews would die, which is a bad thing generally. And so we bred a class of commanding officers who would use ultimate caution in operating their submarines so they didn't die. Then we went to war, and the caution über alles would keep guys from actually fighting, because fighting is dangerous, and they were bred not to do dangerous things. And so we had to replace a bunch of those commanding officers with guys like Mush Morton, and we go down the list, right? George Street and Gene Fluckey, and guys who had the daring do to go out there and actually fight. This was true in the Cold War as well, with all of these Rickover, hand-picked, hand-trained guys that many of whom would I wouldn't say they would run away, but they were not bred for combat. And that became an issue. And it was something that even when I was Commodore, we had to worry about. So that was lesson one. It was the selection of commanding officer and training. The second thing I would say is what we talked about just in the last question that I answered, which is how to integrate submarine operations with the overarching strategic campaign, right? Rather than just a trit, and hope we stumble upon something really important. We've got this phase of the campaign. We're going to go do this thing. How do you integrate the submarines into whatever that thing is? We would always keep the submarines on the periphery of Leyte, for example, and sometimes they struck gold, but they were always on the periphery. We don't need to do that anymore. We could have them fully involved. And the third thing I would say is the Fluckey's barb was called the Galloping Ghost of the China Coast. Does that sound like it'd be a matter of concern or interest in the year 2025 when this episode's going to air? I think so, right? So what have we learned from World War II submarines operating off the China coast, and how do those lessons convey to modern submarine operations? Let me tell you,
It's classified.
there's more congruence than one might think, and I'll leave it at that.
Great answer, Bill. Humor is a great stress reliever, sometimes even when dealing with horrific circumstances. Lord knows you've had to talk about many horrors in documenting the war. And classic tradition of click and clack into the Pacific War, could you tell me a story from the Pacific that always makes you laugh? It could be a verbal or written communication, a prank, a snafu, anything that comes to mind. All the best from Ted.
Great
So,
question.
Seth, do you even know who the Tappet brothers are?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
And I have to give credit to my wife for coining that term. She was the one that was like, yeah, you guys are like the click and clack
Click and clack.
of naval
Yeah, car
history.
talk.
There
I
are
love
several humorous stories that I can think of, and I have to say, unfortunately, none of them
Are printable.
are printable.
Mm.
None of them. If we want people to watch this without getting a little red flag on it, I'll be honest with you, I can't tell you, because there's a lot of them, and they usually involve ladies of the night and or extremely profane language. So I'll just leave it.
I
leave
am
it at that.
recalling,
Although
just briefly that there was a story. I don't know if it's true or not, but Claire Chennault, the head of the Flying Tigers, apparently mistook Madam Shang when she came to the base to do an inspection, that he mistook her for a lady of the night.
it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me at all.
Anyway, I don't know if that's true or not. But
There was one guy, and I guess it's humorous, but he didn't tell it to be humorous. And this one I can tell that there's a gentleman named Mike Mervosh, and he was a very, very good friend of mine. He was 4th Marine Division. He was at Roy Namor, Saipan, Tinian. He did
yeah,
a
you use
tour.
I've heard this name before.
Yeah, he did a tour. Did a tour. He was in the Frozen Chosen. He did 2 tours in Nam. I mean, this guy, he retired Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps. He's incredible, incredible human being. And so anyway, he was on Iwo Jima, and we did a panel at World War II Museum one time, and for an audience or whatever. And one of the audience members asked a question. We had a Q&A, and I was up there standing at the mic, and they're passing the mic just like they do at the World War II conference. And the guy asked, he says, Sergeant Major, did you see the flag go up on Suribachi? And anytime Mike would answer a question or address the audience, he had to stand up. And he stood at like full ramrod attention every time, because that's just who he was. And he stood up and he grabbed the microphone out of my hand. I was handing it to him, and he snatched it and he goes, "Did I see the flag raising?" And he goes, and I quote, he goes, "F no, I was too busy saving my own ass and killing to worry about some damn flag." And he handed me the mic and he sat down. I was like,
That's beautiful.
Okay.
Fair
Answer
enough.
there. So that's one, but I mean, there's a million of them, and I'll be honest with
I
you.
would say too that just sort of maybe not a personal account, but one of the things that I always found amusing was that anytime a destroyer would pluck a naval aviator out
Ice cream.
of the water, ice cream, that if you want your aviator back, you, Mr. Carrier, with the ice cream machine, you gotta give to us, we need a gallon or 3, and that's got to come over in the breeches buoy first before Mr. Aviator comes back to you. Fair is fair. So
there's a famous story about that.
Okay.
There was a air group commander aboard USS Enterprise named William R. Kane. They called him Killer Kane. He was fighting 10 skipper, and then he became CAG right before Phil C, as a matter of fact. And he goes down. I don't know if his bird has a mishap or something. Something happens.
Hell of a lot of ice cream. You want your CAG back.
Yes, that's the point. As he goes down, he smacks his head on the gun sight or something in the Hellcat, and he's dazed and whatever. But he gets out of the bird, and some destroyer picks him up, and there's records of which one it is. I don't know. Anyway, they fish Killer Kane out of the water, and they're like, who are you? What ship do you go? And he's like, I'm, William Kane. I'm with Enterprise, blah, blah, blah. So they saddle up next to Enterprise, and they send via TBS. They say, hey, how much ice cream is Killer Kane worth to you? And those exact words. And Enterprise just started shipping ice cream because they loved him. I mean, not only was he CAG, for Christ's sakes, but they loved the guy. And so, I mean, they literally like gallon after gallon after gallon after gallon.
Because we can just go back to Guam with this guy,
Yeah. Yeah. And they put gallons of ice cream over there. And then they finally sent Kane's ass across over in the breeches.
That's amazing.
Yeah. There you go.
Hey, guys, there was the European theater cartoonist who would do the dog face cartoons.
Bill Malden.
Really famous.
Bill Malden. Yeah, Willie and Joe up front.
Malden, Willie and Joe. That's it. Yeah. Where I'm going with that is, I don't know of an analog or corollary in the Pacific. Do you?
No. So you're talking about cruise books earlier, Bill?
Yeah.
Over my right shoulder here is that cabinet back there, and it's got a bunch of my collectibles in it from the wartime era, and there's I have cruise books, a load of them. That's actually where I get a lot of the oddball one-off material for our shows out of those cruise books. There are cartoons in there, and those are drawn by part of the editorial committee for that cruise book, and some of them are pretty damn funny, and some of them are very mundane, but a lot of them are pretty funny, and you can tell that they're inside jokes for the cruise of that ship. And that's kind of the only thing you see. I mean, the Stars and Stripes was sent to the guys in the Pacific, and they had Willie and Joe in there too. So it was in Yank magazine in the Pacific, and in Europe, and Yank magazine in the Pacific too. So they saw it. But was there a specific Pacific War cartoon? I don't think that there was. I really don't.
Yeah, it was very focused on Europe. It was things in
so
French
Stars and
villages.
Stripes.
Yeah, and it's almost like it's too bad, because it's almost like there wasn't any humor in the Pacific. And I know there was, but I mean, nothing like that. No institutional humor. Stars and Stripes provided for the European theater.
Yeah. Agreed.
So Dave C is asking, Dave C, he wants to know, like, it's going to be 2 questions. I'm kind of combining. It's a big, but what was our take on Emperor Hirohito? Was that something that did we ever say we're going to bomb this place and hope to kill him? Or what was our kind of stance on the Emperor? And, if we kill him, or maybe we should kill him. Was there any talk of that?
I'm not aware that there was ever an intentional plan to do away with him.
Quite the opposite.
Yeah.
Quite the opposite. So during the carrier raids over Tokyo, the Imperial Palace was strictly forbidden as a target.
Off limits, right?
Do not touch it. Don't touch it. Same thing during the fire raids. If you don't think LeMay could have burned that place to the ground, you're high. He certainly could have. Although Hirohito was in an air raid shelter anyway, so it wouldn't have affected him at all. But no, he was off the table, and I frankly don't know why. I think the United States understood the importance of the emperor, hence the reason that he was still in power in September 1945. They understood the importance of the emperor to the Japanese people, and they being us kind of figured that if we do away with this guy,
now we got
and they find out, we got a problem, because they're going to fight no matter what. That's just me guessing.
Okay.
But no, it was strictly off target.
Yeah, we did address a few weeks ago that what should have happened to him after the war.
Yes.
And there's, that's exactly right, John. He was way more involved than common perception represents, right? He was a decision maker.
There's a transitional period where I want to shamelessly, use him in a cynical way to, get this island under control. But as soon as his utility to me is ended, I absolutely would have cheerfully hung him.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Which is the follow-up question to this is, if we're invading Japan, this all changes, right?
Of course. Oh yeah,
I would agree. Yeah.
Atomic bomb on Tokyo.
If we're putting a 1st Marine Division on the Kanto Plain, it's all bets are off, and that's just my
and you're still there,
off, brother. Yeah,
sorry, Charlie.
But he ain't gonna be there. They're gonna pull his ass up into the mountains somewhere.
Yeah, up at the Issei or something like that. Yeah,
he ain't gonna be there.
Michael W. wants to know, wouldn't it have been better for the IAGN to defeat the U.S. Navy in mid-ocean rather than an attack on Pearl? Better carrier aviation, much better torpedoes, could have secured a real gut punch victory, and without an infamy label. Great question, Michael.
Yeah, no, to your point, absolutely. The first TV show I was on where I was playing Minoru Genda, and the counterfactual was that the Pacific Fleet sorties out of Pearl Harbor, and they're now at sea. I got spittle running down my chin. I'm just delighted at that prospect. Sure, I want to sink them in deep water. And there's at least some argument to be made that you should have let the Americans try to pull off War Plan Orange at the very beginning of the war, and send your battleships out to the Central Pacific, and I'll bring Kita Butai, and I'll sink all of your battleships, and now you'll be crying in your beer. That may have been the way to go, but from Yamamoto's standpoint, again, he's got two things that he's got to do in the Pearl Harbor attack. One is, from a military standpoint, he has to protect the eastern flank of his southward advance towards the southern resource area where all the oil is. That's why we're going to war in the first place. And so militarily, I definitely want to take the Pacific Battle Fleet off the table temporarily if I can do that. Two, from a morale standpoint, I want to, if at all possible, break American morale and, send us to the bargaining table as quickly as possible. Of course, that ends up completely blowing up in his face from a strategic standpoint, but that's what he's playing for.
Exactly. And exactly.
John, the spittle on your chin is from the bourbon.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah.
Okay. But to your point exactly, John, it's the whole reason, once the battle line is knocked out at Pearl Harbor, the Japanese can do essentially whatever they want in the Philippines area, in that whole area of the world's ocean, because they know now ain't nobody going to go out there and touch them. Yeah. Nobody can go out there and touch them. So
good stuff.
Yep.
Paul wants to know, did the Japanese ever try to develop self-sealing fuel tanks?
I have no idea.
I'm not enough of an aviation nerd. I don't think
they did, dude.
I
But I
think
don't
they
know.
understood the concept because the Germans understood the concept. I mean, there's nothing magical about a self-sealing fuel tank. It's got a rubber membrane,
You say it's
and
bubble gum.
yeah, bubble gum, right? The bullet goes through the outside, and the bubble gum expands into the hole, and voila. Um, so my sense is that they probably looked at that and they were like, yeah, we could do that, but it would decrease the range of our aircraft because you're putting the bubble gum all the way around your fuel tanks. That takes up volume and it takes up weight. And the Japanese military ethos is all offense, no defense. And so the result is you got these planes that are, yeah, they're flying Type 1 lighters, and that's very deliberate on their part.
Also, rubber is a hot commodity, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
except that they end up capturing more rubber than they know what to do with when they
Okay.
grab Malaya.
No, it's
So,
not that.
yeah,
Okay.
I mean, we're the ones that are hurting, for the lack of rubber at that point, and it's only because we end up throwing umpty hundreds of millions of dollars worth at our artificial rubber programs in 1942 that we managed to bridge that gap by the skin of our teeth. Another one of those sort of improvisational things that is happening during 1942 is we're looking around at this dumpster fire of a war and going, oh, shite, we have no more rubber. What are we going to do about that? I don't know, Bernie. I better figure out a way to, make rubber out of oil or something because, and we're still living with that to this day. I mean, nobody's tires are made out of rubber. It's all artificial rubber, right? That we still drive on the artifacts of World War II because, we can make
It works.
artificial rubber cheaper than the real stuff, unfortunately. So anyway.
Cool. Good answer. Huge thanks from all your hard work in your videos. Fantastic to see such detailed presented so well for the non-academic. I've looked up modern terroir. I'd love to hear your opinions on the state of the island and its deplorable conditions of American and Japanese war dead there. Bodies frequently found in rubbish pits, animal enclosures. The condition of the main landing beaches can only be described as an open air dump. Absolutely shocking, in my opinion. It reflects very badly on the parties concerned, U.S., Japan, Navy, Marines. What is your position on the conditions of the War of the Dead on the island? Regards, Niall from Ireland.
Two things on that.
Who's gonna? Yeah, I'm like, okay, yeah, it's deplorable, but I mean,
But people
it's
live
not.
there.
Yeah, people live there, and
People
it's
live
not our
there. It's their
economy. Are
island.
we? Are
Thank you.
we going to be, funneling billions of dollars into the economy of the local people so that they can actually have toilets instead of relieving themselves on the beaches? I mean,
So the thing with
I
that
don't know.
is when it comes to Bayshio, first of all, the entire island is a graveyard. Let's
Yeah,
be real. Yes, I
right.
know there are certain cemeteries here and there. Everybody knows that. But the entire island, from stem to stern, east to west, north to south, is a battlefield. It is.
And there's 70,000 people living on it now.
Exactly.
Mhm.
There are civilians that live there. That is their home.
Yeah.
In order to preserve, I mean, I think it sucks. Don't get me wrong. But in order to preserve it, we'd have to remove every single one of those human beings from their home, which,
And put them
yes, this
someplace.
country has done before, let's be real,
Yeah,
but we're not going to do that now.
right.
And there's no way to preserve. I mean, yeah, it stinks, but I mean, just
Yeah.
people who live there, dude.
Yeah, we shouldn't answer that callously. I mean, I get similar questions from people. Frankly, when we go to places like Iwo Jima, why do we give this place back to Japan? Well, it's this dirt clod that's sitting in
Yeah,
the
what the
middle of
hell
the
are you going to do
Pacific
with
that
it? Yeah.
that nobody can go to except someone who can afford to dump $20,000 on a tour and come along with a Yahoo like me and go to Iwo Jima, right? So there's just I sometimes think that there's a fair amount of magical thinking around your average American. It's just like, well, we have all this hallowed ground everywhere where we fought, and it should all be preserved magically. And it's just like, well, it takes a crap ton of money to do that, and nobody wants to make that happen. And so
Well,
it is kind of what it
You
is.
you can make the same argument for the Ardennes.
Sure.
I mean,
Right.
that's 80 plus thousand Americans are
Right.
casualties in the Battle of the Bulge, and
Yeah.
not the whole place is a battlefield, but I mean, the vast majority of it is.
Sure.
But we
And
can't,
at the end
you
of the
know,
day, that belongs to Belgium and Germany and Luxembourg,
thank
and
you.
that's
Look,
I,
I get what's
I
the
totally
question?
get it.
What's the man's name?
Niall from Ireland.
Niall. I completely understand your point, and do feel, I mean, Tarawa is one of those places I'd love to go until I saw the overhead Google Earth, and I'm like, I ain't going there.
It's a
It's a
it's a
waste of time.
yeah, it's just absolutely jam packed with
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
shacks.
I mean, I
honestly.
get you. I do, but
Yeah.
people live there, man. It's just it is
Bill,
what
are
it
we
is.
embarrassing ourselves yet?
Not yet. Keep going.
Okay.
I'm waiting until you do.
Okay.
Hello, gents. Huge fan of the show here. You guys are outstanding. My question, why didn't the Japanese tactics and technology evolve throughout the war to the degree that the Allies did once they started suffering defeats? At least they have something to recognize they needed to improve. Did their hierarchy stifle innovation? Really looking forward to Q&A. Thanks, Larry. And I'm going to preface this by, the Japanese were innovators.
Yeah, well,
before the war.
To a point.
So
there's two things going on here. First, I do think that the Japanese innovated. We tend to overlook that innovation just because we were innovating faster and we had a crap ton of cash to throw at our innovation. It's easy to say, well, innovate, but if you're in a position like Japan is that, well, I need a better first line fighter than the Zero, but the only way that I can do that is to build a fighter that's got a really good two-stage supercharger. And that means that I needed to have had the basic investment in material sciences to create all the high temperature alloys necessary to make that supercharger happen. I ain't got that money. That time is no longer available to me. And so there's only so much you can do within the constraints of the nation that you have, the industrial base and scientific base that you have, and the time pressures that are relentlessly being forced on you.
And I agree with that, but to the point that I don't think the Japanese expected the war to last as long as it did.
Oh,
either.
no. I mean,
So
yeah,
they're
right.
not planning ahead. There was a question
sure.
we answered, I think, time before Q&A. Like, why didn't the Japanese put more time and effort into later war pilot training? Because they didn't expect it to last that friggin' long.
Right. Because anyone who had 3 contiguous brain cells in their military understood that if we can't get this war over in the first year, we're screwed anyway. And so that goes back to the whole fuel tank mythos around Pearl Harbor. Why weren't the Japanese more interested in our logistics? Because within the context of a war that is only supposed to last 6 months to 12 months, logistics are irrelevant, man. I am fighting a deliberately short-sighted war. I've got to sink a bunch of American warships, crush their morale, bring them to the table, because blowing up fuel tanks, I mean, America is the world's largest petroleum exporter. What the hell is that going to do to the Americans? Anyway.
Good deal. Rob E wants to know.
You're chuckling at me, Bill.
He's
No, I'm not.
He's from Wisconsin. There are many lesser known.
More.
Drink water. There are many lessons known, or there are many lesser or forgotten battles of the Pacific that you've covered. Biak, the Aleutian campaign, when I have interest in the CBI, an event and actions in New Guinea campaign. I'd love to know what battle or raid or action that you personally feel is the most forgotten and the reasons you feel that way. Again, Robbie from Wisconsin.
The most forgotten.
Forgotten.
I got two. Peleliu. I do. I really
Really?
think that I do. I really do.
There's a
Tons
show.
of press.
There's a series called The
does
Pacific.
now. It does. Yeah, no, and I worked on that series, but it does now. But I mean, before that series, because Eugene
Nobody knew
Sledge's
about that.
book and Lecky's book was out for decades before that series came out. That series was based off those two books, and it wasn't until that series that Peleliu started to gain some traction. And even now, I would say it's significantly less covered than Iwo Jima and Okinawa and Guadalcanal and Tarawa. And Biak, I'm telling you, that is freaking fascinating. Bill, when you and I did that episode on Biak, that was when I was writing the notes and doing the research for that one. That one was like a wow moment for me.
Yep.
Yeah, that was,
Okay, so
I
now
would
we
add
can
Macon.
argue over. Go ahead, Bill.
No, I was just going to say, I would add Macon Island. We covered it, but most people don't know a thing about that and how screwed up Carlson's raiders were in that raid. And we learned a lot from it, but man, oh man.
Did we though?
We were lucky that didn't go south further.
Did we? Did we learn? And of course, Bill, for those listening, Bill, because there's two Macon landings, Bill's referring to the Macon Island raid, is exactly what he's referring to. Did we learn though? What did we learn? Don't do that again.
Yeah, don't do that again.
Let's not try that again, guys.
Well, I mean,
Okay.
a raid, an attempt on a limited action raid with
Yeah.
battalion minus,
Yeah.
it was a couple companies, and
No, it was
thinking that
three, four companies. I don't know.
3 or 4, yeah, it was.
Regardless, yeah.
And
No,
just,
I agree with you
the
100%.
submarine insertion, it was screwed up from beginning to end.
And to
So,
what end? You
yeah.
know, what was the real purpose of that? You know, Nimitz said that it was to divert attention from Guadalcanal. Well, we've been in Guadalcanal for 2 weeks, for Christ's sakes.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
you're not
Yeah.
diverting attention
John.
from anything.
I was just gonna, I think Buna Gona is way
Mm.
less covered than Peleliu, and I think
Yeah, I would agree.
the whole
That's
Finshaven
good.
land campaign is even less covered than any of those. So I'm sorry, I am just going to push hard on Peleliu. There is no way that is not that is a fairly well known battle, I would say, in the grand scheme of things.
Now, maybe.
So, John, I think you probably know this. Our Aussie friends are just really head over heels, over the fact that we've covered.
Dakota.
Almost nobody covers Bunaguna, right? And
Yeah.
and we have, and I'm actually quite proud of that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Anybody else?
Go back and listen to our Biak episode.
Okay.
I've listened to it twice. I think it's
That
amazing.
thing was freaking cool.
I listened to it twice. It's amazing.
And who comes to the rescue? Bob Eichelberg. Let's see.
Bob. Yeah. All right.
I'm going to throw out a couple. I don't think many people know anything about the Indian Ocean, what's going on in that. And you could say, well, that's not really the Pacific. So
yeah, and that'd be if you're talking about battles that the Americans are involved in or something like Indian Ocean. Well, and I would argue too that the Malaya campaign, the Burma campaign in particular,
nobody knows about that. You know, and you guys did a great job with the Aleutian campaign. I don't think many people know that even happened. So you guys need to keep making podcasts, guys. That's what you do there.
No, and I've been leaning on these guys. I want to do the early war Malaya and Burma campaigns because that's a big component in my 42 book, and I just find those fascinating.
We need a time machine. We got to go back. We don't have a time machine.
I know, right?
If you look at the list and of course that list is contained within the triumvirate or quadrants of people on this. Yes. If you look for next season, there's a lot of 1941, 42 stuff in there. Lots. Yeah. Lots. Anyway.
All right.
From Preston, after Midway and Guadalcanal, Japan's strategy of setting up many static garrisons across the Pacific allowed the U.S. to bring overwhelming power to a point of choosing, essentially guaranteeing that the attacked island's garrison would be destroyed while bypassed garrison starved, resulting in much higher Japanese casualties than American. Was there any other strategy Japan could have taken to avoid this, or was this their only option after losing these early advantages in naval and air power?
That's a good one.
The strategy that would have avoided that would have
surrender.
Been, don't go to war with the United States. Do not do that.
If you look at, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, John.
No, man, you're good.
I was going to say, if you look at the sheer amount of territory that these people held, the Japanese, that is, they got to put somebody, a group of people on some of these islands to hold them, per se. So, I mean, you described it one time as punching in a vacuum, just literally grabbing whatever you could at any other time and just like, oh, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this. And then you have to maintain that area. Yeah. You have to garrison that area and you have to keep it in supply.
Yeah.
And something's got to give. And it's,
the interesting thing is you made the point earlier, John, that they studied the Germans, was John or Seth, on the land battle side, right? And Clausewitz, Prussian, they violated Clausewitz. They violated the principle of the war of mass by doing that. So they didn't learn very well, I guess. So the answer I would give to the question isn't that the garrison concept per se wasn't flawed. It was the dilution of the garrison concept that was flawed, I think. And because they try to do too much with too little, and they violated this principle of war mass, and they created weak points all over the place.
Yeah. We've had a number of, because the corollary to that is, okay, what are the non-negotiable positions that the
Fall-
Japanese should have
to fall
captured at
back.
the beginning of the war and held? Where should they have not gone? And some people have noted, and I think to an extent correctly, that this whole notion of cutting off the sea lanes to Australia by pushing down the line of the Solomons and eventually going into places like Tonga and Fiji and wherever, that it's a huge ocean. And okay, so that means that the Americans now have to sail their ships much further to the east, to make it down to Australia. But it's not like the line itself can be cut. So what should the Japanese have grabbed at the beginning of the war, and what should they have declined grabbing? I mean, I obviously think that the whole trying to grab Port Moresby is just ignorant and stupid, and they shouldn't have tried for that. But what do you need? What do you don't need? I don't even know what the answer to that question is, but I just kind of throw it out there.
If you look back at like their defensive line, per se, the defensive line of islands that we penetrate in 44, that we start, with the Marshalls, and then we keep doing Marianas and all that kind of stuff. If you look at that and you say, okay, well, let's not have the defensive line as far
east
as it actually is. Let's bring it back closer to the home islands.
Could they have taken Wake?
But Wake was useless for everybody. I mean, Wake was all it was a, we'll get to that at another stage. But if you bring the island defensive line closer to the home islands and say, okay, we're gonna have a smaller empire and we're gonna hold up here and pile more people here. In my mind, if I'm Japanese, I'm looking, well, that just gives the Americans a little more time to get a little bit closer and a little bit closer and a little bit closer to finally attack me. So to a degree, I can understand why they pushed it as far east as they did.
Mm-hmm.
And rule New Guinea out, take that out of the equation, but just as far east as they did, because they want to put as much distance between the home islands and the United States as humanly possible.
Standoff, yeah.
That's the way I look at it. I don't necessarily disagree with them in trying to do that, but again, you don't have enough dudes to
and
do
the
all
other
that.
thing that we're not talking about, of course, is that this entire barrier strategy is predicated on having a well-constituted mobile reaction force in the form of Kita Butai to react to any of those
Which you
attacks.
no longer have after June 4th.
As soon as you've lost at Midway, it's like, well, now that, and we talk about that in Shattered Sword, that whole barrier strategy is now just out the window. And there's...
Well, you say that though.
You could use land-based air power if you had sufficient numbers of land-based aircrafts. Keep drinking, John. To put on those island garrisons, but anyway.
But you
go
look
ahead. You were going to make a point.
Yeah, I was going to say, you look at Guadalcanal though. Look at Guadalcanal and everything. And again, I always point to that because it's the backbreaker for both sides. But you look at Guadalcanal and they're throwing everything in the kitchen. Well, not everything, but a lot of their resources into that. They're throwing their land-based air from Rabaul and places like that into that.
But they don't commit their Navy in the way that they should have to win that campaign.
Not in the way that they should have, but they do commit their Navy. And I mean, geez, gravy. What they send to Santa Cruz is larger than what they send at Midway. Not in terms of ships, not in terms of carriers, obviously, but in terms of ships completely. I mean, they're throwing everything out there. So I don't know. I just think that they're focusing all their attention on China, and the vast majority of their military, as we all know, is in China, and not in the Pacific, where their real enemy is. And exactly to your point, you've made 100 times on the show, is that the Army didn't start teaching how to fight the Americans until 1940 freaking 4.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, that's not the people. The Chinese ain't the people that are whipping your ass. It's us. But it's true, It's like it's about 2 years too late here, brother.
Yeah.
So anyway,
well, I just think maybe in 43, to kind of, I'm just taking what you two have kind of said and bringing it in 43. If you're like, okay, this ain't happening, let's fall back. It's called strengthening your interior lines, Army doctrine. Strengthen your interior lines. Let's bring everybody back. Let's start defending this circle, this circle around Japan.
But that's what they do. That's what they have. That's what the Marianas are for. That's what the Marshall Islands are for. That's their inner ring. That's what they call it.
But it's too little, too late.
Yeah.
I mean, they would have to do a big redirect from China to your point.
Right.
Well, I agree with you 100%. And then if you look at like the Marianas and especially the Philippines, but Marianas too, a lot of the dudes that they're bringing out there, where are they coming from? They're coming from China.
Right, Korea, China.
Yeah, they're pulling them out. They're pulling them out of the mainland Asia,
Yep.
Asian continent, and bringing them, over to the
Manchuria.
Pacific.
Yeah,
And,
the
which is
Manchukuo
why,
Army.
yeah, we
which
should
is
have
why
done
the
that 2 years
Kwanzang
ago.
Army is a shell of itself when the Soviets fall on it in
That's
August
right.
of 1945.
Exactly.
All right.
Nobody knows about that. That's a great part of the war. All right. Love the podcast. Keep up the great work. Is there anything that the IGN could have done that would have significantly reduced the attrition that largely wiped out its experienced aviators by the start of 44? Would a rotation
Not fought the United States.
JJ Cooper's like,
Yeah,
he wants to know about the rotation. Like, should they have started bringing people back to train?
He's
All right.
right in that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they should have done what we were doing, and they should have pulled cats out like, Saburo Sakai, and those cats should have been going back to train the new cadre that was coming up, and they didn't do that. They should have.
There were some guys that did do that, but they weren't enough. Number one, because a lot of them got killed, too.
Right.
And then two, it goes back to the point we made, I don't know, however many minutes ago, is the Japanese never planned for the war to be this freaking long, man.
Yeah.
And we in the United States, we take those early war guys that we talked about last week that are just these masters at their craft, and we know that these are the best pilots in the Navy. These guys are like, they are the best pilots in the United States Navy. That's why you see guys after June 4th, 1942, they get back to Hawaii and they're gone. They're back in the States. Anybody over JG is back in the States.
I have to tell you, the more you drink, the more cogent you get.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Here we go.
James D wants to know, I'm watching your series on Okinawa. I love your show, by the way, especially when there are 3 of you. James, how about, it's probably better when there's 4 of us, but that's just my opinion. My question is, could the U.S. just cordon off the southern part of the island? Just put it.
Okinawa.
Yeah, just cut that poor southern portion off. We got it under control. Let's move on. What are your all's thoughts on that?
No.
What is Gunther? Gunther.
He's right here. I think to answer that question, I agree with Bill. No. And for multiple reasons, not the least of which is there's an armed enemy there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We're going to eliminate that enemy because the Japanese have a tendency, they have a history of launching these massive bonsai charges that, a la Saipan, that are going to push through our relatively undefended lines. And that means we're going to have to keep a full perimeter 24 hours a day for however long on the island of Okinawa. It ain't going to happen. Not going to happen.
Without much opportunity to rotate those troops.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
I wonder, too, how much the experience on Bougainville informed that as well, that, we kind of dug in around the perimeter of our airfield there. And, of course, the Japanese end up marching, their entire garrison across the island to launch this counterattack against us that gets wrecked.
What was that?
That we look at that behavior and we're just thinking to ourselves, if we leave them in this enclave in the south, that sure as hell they're going to put in a counterattack against us. And honestly, as long as dudes like Isamu Cho are still components of that army, that's what they're going to be aggravating to do.
Right.
Yeah. All right. This one's going to be difficult, so I really need you guys to put your thinking caps on for this one. Okay. I need battle focus. Okay. All right. Seth, you're not focused.
I'm focused. I'm looking for something because there was another battle reference, but that's okay.
Please settle once and for all the most controversial and argued over question ever about the Pacific. Ginger or Marianne?
Ginger all the way, dude.
Oh, Marianne. Are you kidding me?
Marianne.
I'm a Marianne guy.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Marianne.
3-1. Ginger's gorgeous, don't get me wrong, but Marianne is not chopped liver, and she's much lower maintenance and more practical. I'm totally a Marianne guy.
Yeah, but if you're looking for a fun time, Ginger's the way to go, brother.
Yeah, but you're stuck on this island with her for how many years, my dude?
Yeah, but I mean, you can't go get shit on number 5 when you're on the island. So it's like, hey, babe, suck it up, just rock and roll.
Ginger is not going to suck it up, but Marianne is. Totally Marianne.
You never know.
Marianne. Okay.
Thanks, Brian. That was a great question, Brian, to break it up a little bit. Gentlemen, would more extensive use of napalm have been helpful in breaking stalemates on Iwo Jima and Okinawa?
Why does the question have to be or?
Right.
Why can't it be Ginger and Marianne?
It can, dude. Just drop it.
As far as the napalm question is
And
concerned,
the
I don't know how
island-
you could
That's
use
from
any more than we
Conrad
did.
F. Conrad F.
Gilligan's
about
Island is not
napalm.
Okinawa, guys.
I love
Okay,
the smell of napalm in the morning.
Napalm.
But how much
Smells like
more
victory.
napalm could you use, for Christ's sakes? I mean, we
They were in
napalmed
caves.
the snot out of that place.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, I think that there's this sort of common misperception that napalm is this sort of, Wunderwaffen that just,
not.
annihilates things. It's like, yeah, it's super useful in a certain context. It didn't let us win the Vietnam War either,
So the thing with napalm, and Bill, you can expound on this far better than I, and please do so, is that it being a, for lack of a better term, liquid fire, it sucks all the oxygen out of the area. It burns whatever it touches. We know that. But in order to be useful in a place like Okinawa and or Iwo Jima, you have to have almost a direct hit in that cave. And that
That's
is
right.
very unlikely. I'm not saying it didn't happen. It is highly unlikely for a Corsair screaming in at 400 miles an hour to put a bomb right in that hole where it's going to vaporize everybody in that cave. It's
Yeah.
highly, highly unlikely. It would have been
Really,
great
what
if
we
it
needed
happened, but
was a lot of GBU, 2000s and that kind of thing. I mean, you needed precision guided weapons to take those holes out.
Yeah.
if you
That
could find
We
them.
got better. We got better at fuel air mixtures later. Decades later.
Mhm.
Napalm mostly burned, but it did have a little bit of that oxygen depriving effect.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Great line.
It was like victory.
All right. John asks, hey, Seth, what's the prince in your office?
And of course, he's not in his office now.
That's why I'm asking. That's why I'm asking him.
I don't know. No, the prince in my office.
Enterprise.
You've got
Yeah,
a carrier. You got a battleship in there though, too, don't you?
3 of them.
Okay, and they
All
are.
right, so I'll, over my right shoulder in my office, obviously not here, is, like Bill said, is a print of the Enterprise. Directly over to my right, which again nobody sees, is it's a print by I can't remember the guy's name, but it's called First Hit at Midway, and it's 4 SBDs, and they're about to roll and do their thing. Directly behind me is a print of the USS Alabama.
Okay.
It's the small one. It's almost directly behind my
Yeah, I
head, and
figured
above that, and above that is a print of the USS North Carolina that I bought when my son and I went there. When did we go? June, July, this past summer.
last year.
And then over behind my right hand shoulder above is a print of Washington steaming out of Espiritu Santo.
To go and lay down a can of whoop ass.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir. Yes, sir.
Good question. This one's so John's got 3 great questions. So the second one I'm gonna give for Bill. Bill, why was
wait. And let me, before I finish, and off to my left, and Sean, you've seen this. No, you've seen this, and this is
I
badass.
know where you're going. I know where you're going.
It's the tablecloth from VFN 90 aboard USS Enterprise. It is their like ready room tablecloth that I bought and my wife had framed, and it hangs in my office. So
pretty impressive.
I have nothing
All right.
like that.
All right, Bill, you ready for this one? This one's right up your alley. Why was MacArthur picked for the surrender ceremony instead of Nimitz?
Nimitz was there.
Yeah. He was, but Nimitz signed for the United States. MacArthur signed the top line, right, for the Allied nations. And it was, he'd already been declared to be the supreme. He was going to be the dude running the occupation.
Supreme Commander, Allied Powers, SCAP.
Scab.
Scab.
Thank you.
Oh, no, sorry.
Yeah.
Scab.
Yeah.
Right.
He was the scab before that.
Mhm.
Okay. So John also asked, this is John R's last question. I had asked before about Nimitz was picked and if there was anyone else for consideration. So I'm reading the book Mastering the Art of Command by Trent Hone.
Yeah.
And he states that there was a list that was submitted to Roosevelt and Knox and said Roosevelt would have been satisfied with the second person on the list, which was Nimitz. Who was the first person on the list?
Go ask Trent, and I can give
go
you his
find Trent,
email if you want.
Go ahead. Give it to him. Give it to John.
I don't know.
Let's announce it on the show.
Seriously, to that point, you can find my email relatively quickly. Send me an email, John, and I will hook you up with Trent. And because I don't know the answer to that, but Trent
I
will.
don't know.
Okay.
Bill,
You
He's a
guys-
friend of ours.
John,
Bill,
you stumped him.
Bill, you're a Nimitz fanatic. Do you know?
Yeah, I can't remember.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
it was, yeah.
'Cause he
I
doesn't-
always
he
I
doesn't
was
say it
always
in
under
his
the
book,
assumption
right?
that it was like it was Nimitz or
So
nobody. And obviously
let's
it
be
was
clear
always the
about
second
this.
choice.
Knox pretended that he had some influence on this decision.
It did
He
not.
did not.
It was FDR.
This was FDR all the way. So
Mhm.
FDR might have humored him into believing, oh yeah, that number one guy, he's fine, but it's going to be Nimitz. He wanted Nimitz from a year before that. I think we talked about that a bunch.
Right.
Go ahead.
Mhm.
Right.
All right. Good stuff. All right. So I've got a question from a teacher. All right. So this is really good for thinking, put your thinking caps on. Thank you, Gemma, for taking the time to do another Q&A. I have two questions, but they are related. Question one, is your professional opinions as historians lecturer, do you think The Last Stand of the Tin Can Soldiers would be
Sailors.
age appropriate for high school classrooms?
Sailors.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So that's
Yep.
easy. He teaches English in Mississippi. He's actually doing some work. The question two, are there any other good books on the Pacific War that you think would probably be good for high school appropriate?
Gene Sledge.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
what high school?
obviously,
What grade
you know,
level
except for,
though?
you know,
Whoa,
digging
whoa.
through human corpses.
Well,
you know,
what grade
No.
level? If
Whoa,
it's
whoa.
junior or senior level high school class, yeah, Gene
you know,
Sledge is
it's-
fine.
Yeah.
If it's freshman or sophomore,
Mhm.
maybe not.
I don't know.
Mm.
There's tons of good books.
Indianapolis, the 2018 book titled Indianapolis. I think that's age appropriate for
By
high
Sarah
schoolers.
Vladek.
By Sarah Vladek and Lynn Vincent. Yeah.
All right.
And I'm not saying that because I'm in it.
Sarah
I am.
Vladek is freaking awesome too. She is a very
They both
cool
are.
cat.
He actually has a lesson plan that is on with John's book for his class people. So Shattered Sword is probably a good book, I would imagine.
You
Wait,
should
if he's gonna
probably
do-
you should probably just
If
play
he's gonna
these
do
episodes for
1,000
your
pages
class.
Books.
Yeah.
You should probably just play these episodes for your class. It's an easy way out. You say, here, we're going to learn about Saipan today. Play, and then go out and,
Sure.
grab a cup of coffee.
That's
Look, if he gets high school students to read 1,000-page books, I
It's
want to
not
know
1,000
what school that is.
pages. It's only 600.
Only.
Okay.
The
Only
next one is
600.
1,000.
The next one's 2,000.
Right.
No, it's not. No. Not if it's an 8-point type. It's not. Anyway. All right.
Nice.
Great. Continue.
That was
Nice.
good. You guys are on a roll here.
Touche.
That guy is S. Murray 189. He didn't leave his name, but he's a teacher in Mississippi. Thanks. We hope we
Thank
help
you.
a little bit with that.
Well, if
Thanks-
you're a
thanks
teacher,
for
if
being
you're a teacher,
by the way.
yeah, and this is coming from the son of a retired teacher of 35 years. So if you are a teacher in Mississippi, I highly encourage you to come to the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum in Camp Shelby. I'd love to meet you. So
There's a plug.
Mm.
There's
There
a
you go.
plug.
just ask for me.
Now, I would say, hang on a second. I do want to say almost nobody teaches World War II in high school anymore. They teach Pearl Harbor, atomic bomb, and nothing in between. So
G-Day
thank
and
you.
Tuskegee Airmen. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for what you're doing. Thank
Yeah.
you, all you teachers, for what you're doing.
Chris R. wants to know, has anybody approached John about Shattered Sword doing elements for films or TV?
No.
That would be so cool, though. That would be so cool. We could all go and make sure it's done right.
All right.
Oh,
Go ahead,
that
John,
wouldn't
and I got
happen.
something to say for that. but go
Okay.
ahead.
They just did a Midway movie in 2019, man. There's not going to be another Midway movie probably for another 20 years or something like
Maybe.
that. So, although that said, actually, I did just get an email from somebody wondering about the film rights, and I referred them on to our agent. And so, I have no idea on that, but
So I don't think it necessarily needs to be a Hollywood release. And I've said this for over a decade. And John, if you remember, you were a part of the initial conversations of this. At the National World War II Museum resides the oral histories of every surviving combat aviator from the Battle of Midway from the American side. And I know because I did them, recorded between 2004 and 2009. And we
Okay.
had a conversation about making the Battle of Midway documentary.
yeah.
That has yet to be done, and all those resources are there. So that's what needs to be done is the Battle of Midway documentary, not the movie,
Right, a
the
documentary.
documentary, because
Yeah,
those
that would be
resources
cool.
are there.
That would be really cool to do.
Yeah, Tony came down for that conversation at World War II, and we did you were on the conference call. I remember that. And,
Okay.
but yeah, that was, man,
Yeah.
that would
Yeah,
have been
that'd be
bad to the
neat.
bone.
All right. So I'll do my last question is from Dan C. He's a USMC retired residing in Pensacola, Florida. So just imagine, Dan, while you're getting your question read. There has been a number of episodes in which iron bottom sound was mentioned. As a quick segue from Jon Parshall, that is, as part of the discussion about why large ships did not routinely operate in the sound, Jon made the comment of how much more maneuverable the Iowa-class battleships were than their predecessors. Could you please reach out to Jon and get some discussion expanding on that comment? Could the Iowa class been used there, or is that just too big, or the maneuverability?
They weren't built yet.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying hypothetically.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know that turning radius is necessarily the limiting issue there. Really, the limiting issue is you got this teeny tiny body of water, and you've got naval rifles that can fire all the way across it. So it really is, it's a cage match. You know, whether your turning radius is 200 yards or 350 yards is sort of irrelevant. It's just, you don't want to be in that sort of a constricted space where your maneuver options are distinctly limited.
And you got 887 foot of battleship if it's an Iowa class. That's
Yeah.
a lot of boat.
Yeah.
That's a lot of boat.
Cage fight is a wonderful way to describe that, by the way. Yeah, that's
I
wonderful.
think it's true. Yeah. I
It's a
think
knife
that
fight and a
is.
telephone
it's a
booth,
cage
man.
fight.
Well, I will not. I'm not giving up the con, Bill. I'm just taking a time out here for a few minutes, man.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Fair enough.
All right. So, with that final question for this particular episode, we're going to wrap it up. Shawn, is there anything else you want to add, or you want to save the rest for the next time we get together, which is going to be in just a few minutes?
We're going to meet back in about 10 to 15, and we're going to keep going, but we're going to take a break. I've still got the con.
All right. Well, we're tapping out for right now. So with that and my dog who's walking out my office here, we want to say thank you very much for listening and or watching to the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. Please subscribe and like wherever you receive your podcasts. Look at us on YouTube if you're not already doing so. If you have a question or comment, send us an email at unauthorizedpacificpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, my name is Seth Parrott, and I want to thank you very much for listening and or watching. Jon, my brother, thanks again. It has been great fun, and
Yes,
we will see you very shortly.
Very shortly.
Shawn, as always, thank you very much for being our MC of this and the last episode and the one coming up. And we're looking forward to getting together again here in a few minutes. And Bill, DD, my designated driver, bring us home.
You didn't screw that up, Seth, so you clearly haven't had enough to drink. We'll see you again next week.